Destiny of a Savior by Famous Fault. Chapter 13. Feline Intervention. It was awkward, to say the least. Handa had made him buy books on the subject when he had still bullied Yugi, and Jonochi had once gotten him a video on the very same subject before he had known about Atem's presence, and it had resulted in Jonochi calling him a pervert. When Anzu had inquired as to what the video was, Yugi had become bright red and hidden it. It had not been the best of his moments. He never watched it. Not that there was any resemblance between that moment in his life and this one. When Jonochi had offered him the video, he had accepted it because for once in his life he wanted to be bad, or at least a little naughty. Because of Anzu's interference, he could not go through with it at the end. This had nothing to do with trying to be naughty. This was just plain bad luck, and far from anything he had ever asked for. It was without a doubt among the most awkward things he had ever been unfortunate enough to experience. Walking in on two people sleeping with each other in the middle of the forest was the last thing he had expected when we had gone to find Dean and Tracy. They did not notice him, and Yugi used that little streak of luck to turn and leave before they did. He was beet red and not the least pleased. They were his students! Sure, it was only logical that they would do such things. They were 17. Yet it was not a thought that had ever crossed Yugi's mind. Atem took it much easier and laughed at Yugi in a kind way.
Not so distressed, partner. It's completely natural. Give them an hour or so and go back again. We know where they are now.
It's awkward! Yugi protested, at loss as to how easy Atem could take it.
Only for you. They don't know. Don't tell them and forget about it. We're here for a reason,
Atem said, sounding perfectly unaffected. How can you take it so easy? Yugi protested, still not his natural shade. It's something very private we walked in on.
It worked differently when I grew up. I don't understand why people of this time make such a big deal out of it.
Yugi had no sensible reply to that, and since Atem lived inside him, he couldn't glare at him either. Instead, he sat down beneath a tree somewhere and waited for the heat on his face to subside. Atem kept laughing at him in good humor a little while longer, assuring him it wasn't such big a deal. He couldn't convince his lighter. 3 hours passed before Yugi dared to approach them again. They were to Yugi's relief fully dressed when he saw them again. They were packing up their modest camp when he descended from the trees. Dean, Tracy, he said in a whisper, hoping not to alarm them. The two of them had their wands out and aimed in less than a second, but they did not attack immediately. They searched with their gazes until they saw him and thought before attacking. When they recognized him, the hostility vanished from their faces, but they did not lower their guard. Who are you? Tracy hissed distrustfully. Without hesitating, Yugi relinquished control to them, who greeted Tracy and Dean formally, before giving Yugi his body back. It was more than proof enough that Yugi really was Yugi, and both Dean and Tracy lowered their wands. Professor! Tracy called out, surprised. Her voice clouded with worry. What are you doing here? Making sure you're alive, he said, disregarding that professor part of her exclamation. Why didn't our alarm go off? Dean asked, explaining why he looked so troubled. That's Atem's doing, Yugi said. Don't worry, it'll react on anyone but me. Dean did not seem to be eased, but nodded in acceptance. He gestured toward the center of the open place, an invitation for him to sit down. Yugi obliged, his expression grave. Tracy and Dean sat down semi-opposite him. Atem appeared in spirit form next to Yugi, also in a sitting position, though he wasn't actually touching the ground. You're wanted, Dean noted. Why? Am I? Yugi asked. It did not surprise him, but it was still unpleasant to have it confirmed. I expected as much. So are you, Dean. We've been keeping ourselves as informed as we can, Tracy told him. We know one or two things about what is going on. The only thing we don't know anything about is Hogwarts. Snape is headmaster, Yugi said gravely. I resided there until he chased me away. Chased? Dean repeated skeptical. Just that. Yugi looked uncomfortable while Atem smiled. These children really couldn't be tricked if you could still count them as children anymore. It was ordered by Snape for me and Rio to be killed. I escaped with McGonagall's help. Tracy smiled a bit. For me and Rio to be killed. I escaped with McGonagall's help. Tracy smiled a bit. It's nice to know that there are people like Professor... It's nice to know that there are people like McGonagall. Rio, Dean said, tasting the name. I've heard that before. Then he recalled the day where he, Harry, Ron, and Hermione had confronted Professor Muto. A lot sure had changed since then. He was in the tomb, one of the survivors. Yugi nodded in confirmation. Yes. The thought of Rio made his stomach ache of sheer worry. Not knowing whether he had survived or not was almost unbearable. He felt the incorporeal hand of Atem on his shoulder in means of comfort. They both were worried sick. Dean did not inquire about Rio further, and Yugi was relieved. He didn't want to tell yet another person that he did not know if his friend was alive or not. Every time he did that, it felt as if he had betrayed Rio somehow. What's Hogwarts like now? Tracy asked, obviously grieved to hear that Hogwarts had fallen into Snape's hands. Yugi told them what he could, but in the end it wasn't all that much. He told them about Peter, and they were relieved to hear that he was still doing fine. The Tricky had showed up just a couple of hours ago, and Atem left Master Kyonshi with the task of protecting Dean and Tracy and keep them informed on what was going on as much as he could. The only thing he could not understand was why neither Peter nor the somewhat legendary couple had left the country. He asked, "Because we still want to fight. We've got contact with Neville, who's at Hogwarts, and he has promised to call for us when we make our stand. At the very least, take Hogwarts back," Dean explained, without a single sign of hesitation in his voice. "You're risking being captured for the small chance of being able to fight," Yugi said and smiled. "That's brave. And stupid." "Why don't you just leave the country? You're not even from here to begin with," Dean retorted, insulted at Yugi's words. "Because neither of us can stand by while those who don't deserve to die do. We have the capability of protecting, and that's what we'll do. We once told Dumbledore that perhaps we could tip the scales, change the outcome of the war. And lastly, Hogwarts was the closest to a home I had had for a very long time, and I'll defend it, free if I can, including the inhabitants." "That puts our stupidity on equal scale," Dean stated at Yugi's explanation. Yugi smiled. "It probably does." Then he looked at Master Kyonshi, who was certain to inform him and Atem if anything were to happen to the two. It does, however, not change the fact that... Yugi was interrupted by a yelp from Tracy. She dug a hand in her pocket and conjured something that looked like a regular galleon. Dean reacted immediately. "What does he say?" Yugi and Atem were left to wonder what was the big deal about the coin. It looked pretty much like any galleon he had ever seen before. He did, however, not express his confusion. He was sure they'd explain in due time. "It's not a date. They're letters. Words," she said, and held the galleon close to her eyes. "It says snatch and slain. It's one word. Snatch, slain, F. I suppose they had to limit themselves to 12 characters. It's a capital F. Probably an initial." "Snatch and slain by someone with an initial F who without a doubt was from the DA. Snatch as in snatched?" Dean asked, looking at the coin too. Tracy shook her head. "I think snatch as in both snatched and snatcher. Snatched by a snatcher. That could mean this person is highly likely Muggle-born. Do we know someone like that?" she asked and looked up at Dean, who was frowning. Then his frown disappeared. "Dr. Carving. He is Muggle-born and was with the DA. Or Felicia Lucas," Yugi added, who now had called on. "She was Muggle-born too, am I wrong?" Tracy and Dean exchanged glances. Then Tracy nodded. "She was. It could be her too," Dean said. "It should not surprise me that you know who was in the DA," he said, and then smiled. "Rebecca?" "Dobby," Yugi replied. "He kept me up to date on almost everything in the castle. I owe that elf a lot. The more I think of it, the more I realize how much he's done." Tracy had not paid attention to the brief exchange. "Slain," she whispered and spun the coin as if it would show something more. "Slain killed? The person who sent this was alive when sending it. So what does it mean?" "Perhaps someone else was murdered? Perhaps the elf was murdered rather than being the one who sent this," Dean said, thinking about the boy that had lost his temper every time he had failed the spell. He seriously hoped that it was not the case. "Or perhaps they were going to be killed soon." "Where do you think they are?" Yugi asked. "They're being interviewed, and since they're apparently criminal, sent to Azkaban. My guess would be the Ministry of Magic," Dean said, using only common sense to get to that point. Tracy nodded in confirmation. "I'll find out," Atem said, but before he could say or do anything more, a feline walked into the campsite. It was a large cat with stripes and spots alike, reminding of a crossing between a tiger and a leopard. "I recognize that cat," Tracy called out, surprised. What's it doing here? Yugi also recognized the cat. That's Cole's cat, he told Atem with a frown.
That's not a cat,
Atem said and looked at the cat with a frown. What? Yugi asked, utterly surprised. His surprise must have been evident on his face, for Tracy and Dean did not miss that something was wrong. They looked at him, waiting for further explanation.
That cat is in fact from the dominion of the beasts,
Atem said, not sounding surprised in the least.
May I?
Yugi withdrew, still marveling over the fact that Cole's cat wasn't cat, but a ka. Why in the world would a beast from the Dominion keep so close to Cole? There had to be some reason for it. The beasts never did anything without a reason. Atem. Tracy greeted him when she noticed the difference. Atem greeted them with equal composure, then turned to the cat.
I greet you.
The cat sat down and looked at Atem with the same condescending look she gave everyone. Clearly she was unfazed by the person that had addressed her. Then she bowed her head to indicate that she had understood him.
You have been keeping watch over Cole. For what reason?
He asked, although he thought he knew. The Ka had, however, no way to speak, lacking vocal cords required for the kind of speech Atem could understand. Instead, she just looked at him.
Jun, was it?
Atem continued, annoyed at the limited amount of communication they could manage.
I assume Cole has a role in this.
Jun nodded and waited for him to continue his guess.
Is that my fault? Could it have been prevented?
Once again, to Atem's horror, Jun nodded.
Because I gave him my deck.
Jun shook her head. Both she and Atem were ignoring the baffled teens standing close to them. Master Gyonchi was simply standing where he stood, ignoring them all.
Because I gave him... you. I gave him... Dark Magician Girl told me she'd be right there in my deck whenever I needed her. It's not the cards, it's you all,
Atem stated.
The monsters from the Dominion.
Jun nodded, a blaze in her eyes. Clearly, she was mad at him. Atem shifted position, so he was sitting cross-legged against a tree. She was mad at him, mad for his stupidity. He himself was mad at him. But it was my idea, Yugi said, equally horrified.
And I didn't stop you. I should have known that it is not something we could run from. Why aren't you with him now?
Atem asked the Bengal-shaped Ka. Jun stood up and walked over to Tracy, clawing at the coin. He's still alive, right? Tracy asked, not even thinking about the fact that she was talking to what she still believed to be a cat. Jun nodded and took a few steps away from the Slytherin. Then she walked a couple of steps and fell, playing dead. Clearly, she was trying to give them a message. He's dying, Dean asked, not particularly fond of the charade game. Jun nodded, then shook her head, and nodded again. He'll die soon, Yugi said, who in astral form had appeared next to Atem. Jun, who clearly could see and hear him, nodded.
And you want us to prevent it,
Atem stated.
Because he still has a part to play.
Jun nodded, walked towards Atem, and clawed at his pants in a clear gesture of impatience. Atem stood up.
Your opinion, Abel?
It's the least we owe him. We have nothing better to do anyway. Jun will probably lead us to the other Muggle-borns. If we don't let our presence be known to the guards, we could do a lot of good, Yugi said, making Atem smile fondly. 2 years ago, doing good had not been Yugi's priority. It was nice to have that back.
You aren't doing this for him, are you? You care for other things. Things you deem more important. You let Rebecca die, although you knew it would happen. The only reason you're asking me to save him is because you still need him, for whatever reason.
Jun did not even attempt an answer, though she looked away, unwilling to meet his eyes.
For the shadows,
Atem whispered. They sat in silence, all 5 of them. Tracy and Dean exchanged a short, silent conversation, letting each other know that they had no idea what was going on. Yugi and Atem were in silent contemplation. The amount of different situations they could end up in were endless, and all of them dangerous. Jun poked at Atem some more, urging him to hurry.
We're going,
he told the couple suddenly.
We'll find Cole and the other Muggleborns and see what we can do for them. Master Kyonshi will stay with you.
Dean and Tracy exchanged a quick glance. Be careful, the Slytherin said, knowing it was pointless to protest. In fact, their previous history teacher and the ancient pharaoh were probably the best chance the Muggleborns had.
We will,
Atem assured them. We'll see you around, Dean said as Jun sped off, clearly eager to get on the move. Promise us we'll see you two again, Tracy called after the two who lived in an odd sort of coexistence. Right back at you, Yugi called out, who had taken control again. Then the campsite vanished between the trees. Heather didn't return. Cole had been pacing around nervously ever since they, like promised, came to get her. The lights had not even been on for an hour when they slammed the door open, leaving Ant with a mean bruise and had dragged the Hufflepuff girl out of the cell. They had all been too surprised to struggle, though Cole doubted any of them would have. In less than 5 seconds, the door had opened and closed, leaving them with one person less. When the door opened again, it was very much in the same manner. When it closed, only Frederick, Ant, and Cole were left. Damn it! Frederick swore when they realized Leanne, too, was gone. That they were disappearing was one thing that worried Cole. That they weren't returning was far worse. Ant furiously banged on the door with 2 hands a single time. They all knew no one would react. It happened all the time, but it was the emotion the gesture displayed that mattered. Can any of us prove that we have wizard ancestry? Ant hissed with low voice. No, Ant, I don't think so, Frederick said, being more honest than any of them had wanted him to be. So our next stop is Azkaban? Ant asked, his question not even really a question. No one answered him. Cole noticed that he was crying. Typical, he was such a crybaby. Angrily, he wiped away his tears, hoping that neither Ant nor Frederick had noticed it. He sat in absolute silence, knowing his voice wouldn't carry. He wondered where Jun was. Why had she abandoned him? Then he felt a familiar weight in his left pocket. He used to have his own deck in his right, Yugi's deck in his left. Still, nobody knew about it. When he was sure his voice would remain steady, he spoke. Ant, I have something to tell you. Ant made a surprised noise at the sudden statement, but he turned his attention on Cole. Tell me before they barge in again! I already told you that I was in London when I met the King of Games. He started and Ant nodded. I didn't tell you everything, but considering our circumstances, I thought someone might just as well know. Cut the suspense, tell me! Ant demanded, not unfriendly. Well, he told us all that he had ceased to be a duelist and all that, but he had to prove a point to himself, I believe. He, by some odd reason, chose me for it. Fate apparently wasn't on Cole's side because the door slammed open once again. The sound of a body hitting the floor was overpowered by Ant's furious scream when 2 hands dragged him out of the cell harshly. Ant! Cole called out horrified, but before his friend could reply, the door was slammed shut in the Ravenclaw's face. Staggering backwards, he tripped over something. Cole suppressed a scream and scraped his elbows on the floor when he attempted to keep himself from landing too roughly. He crawled back up, ignoring the pain in his arms. Frederick? No answer. Then, moving around carefully, he located Frederick's unconscious body. It wasn't the first time the door had hit one of them a bit harder than was healthy, but the timing was so incredibly poor that Frederick felt like crying some more. He shook the older boy gently, hoping he'd wake up. It soon became apparent that Frederick was out cold. Slowly but sure, Cole was becoming hysteric. They had used each other as a source of comfort. Being all alone made him lose all common sense. Azkaban? He was so afraid. Mom, Dad, Theo, I'm so sorry, he whispered. He doubted his parents were worried yet. He had never written to them often, and since they had no proper idea of what was going on, they couldn't imagine in what sort of position he was. He'd probably never see them again. He wished it had never happened. He would have preferred to live like he did before Madame Hooch had showed up. When the door opened yet again, he simply walked into the hands of the man who came to collect him. He really felt no need to fight. In the temporary light, he could see that the door might have hit Frederick too hard. A little puddle of blood had started to form around his head. The guards simply laughed at the sight and closed the door. He was roughly being pushed up a flight of stairs leading to the 10th floor. Cole did his best not to stumble, but it was hard to keep in line, and at the same time out of the man's hands. Eventually they reached a hallway revealing a long row of doors, all leading to various courtrooms. The man reached out to open a door with the number 7 on it, when from the shadows a short cloaked figure appeared.
How boring,
it whispered, just loud enough for Cole and the man to hear. The man turned to the cloaked figure. only his courtiers visible where he stood surrounded by shadows. Cole noticed that the man who had been leading him to the courtroom was frightened. How strange. Did he know something Cole did not? The short figure took another step forward and lifted his head a little, making the lower part of his face visible.
You are a Death Eater. Should you not be doing different things than guarding the dungeons and leading Amalgamorns to the courtrooms? Do they not have frightened little ministry workers running around for such low-level jobs, Jugson, or Dementors? You aren't even allowed to witness their despair. You must be quite bored after such a spirit-killing task.
Jugson frowned and had his hand in a firm grip around his wand. Who are you?
You knew that the moment you saw me.
A mocking voice said.
That's why you were so afraid. Jugson, you would take pleasure in hearing a person scream. Why do you satisfy yourself with this? No one would mind it if you would take one of those insolent muggle-born brats and do away with them, just the way you want. Hear them scream.
Cole started to shake. Was this person suggesting for Jugson to torture him? He did not want to be tortured. He did not want to die. Jugson noticed his fear, and the man gave a terrifying smile. The short, cloaked figure took some more steps forward, the lower side of his face showing a satisfied smile. When Jugson turned to Cole, the smile of the figure turned into a grin, and a ball of fur hit Jugson and pulled its claws over the man's face. Cole didn't need more than a second to recognize the creature. Jun! He cried out happily. He had absolutely no idea where she had suddenly come from, but he was happier than ever that she had showed up. Then he turned to the cloaked figure, who didn't look very happy at all anymore. He wondered if Jun could protect him from that figure too. The short, cloaked figure reached up a hand and pulled the hood down, revealing his identity. Before Cole stood the king of games. He gawked. It wasn't the person he had expected to show up there. He had no idea who would have made more sense, but at the same time he knew of no one who would have made less sense.
Jun, don't kill him,
the figure said, clearly expecting the cat to understand him. Oddly enough, she did. She jumped down to the ground just before actually slicing his carotid. She looked highly displeased. Jugson fell to the ground, panting heavily, blood covering his face and robes.
I hope you can disregard everything I just said,
the Japanese said with a smile.
Mohidori no Boku is still recovering from shock after hearing all that from me.
I am still recovering from hearing all that, Yugi said bluntly, nearly fainting from relief. I do apologize, Yugi said, fully sincere. I thought it would be the easiest way to distract him. It was surely effective. Disregarding that, are you unharmed? Cole nodded. Yes, I'm fine. I'm just not sure. Why are you here? Jun came to me. She told me you were in a lethal position, so I decided to come and help you out. The message on the coins. Do you know anything about it? It worked? Cole asked and perked up. It was your doing? Yugi asked, surprised. How did you manage it? Tell me more about it. What did it mean? Who's F? It was Frederick's idea and coin, so that's where the F came from, Cole said, and the expression of alarm on the former teacher's face witnessed that Cole had not been able to hide his worry. I'm not sure if he's still alive. He hit his head when they came to get Ant. He didn't wake up again. The man that had unexpectedly appeared looked all mortified at the news, but quickly shook it off. Keep your composure, Cole. I need you to tell me more. How did you end up here, and what has happened while you were here? Cole did his best to comply, trying to keep himself from getting hysteric. He did, however, think he had a right to it by now. They were both still ignoring Jugson, who was being watched closely by Jun, who was ready to slit his throat the moment the Death Eater made a wrong move. The boy told the former pharaoh everything, from the assault on the Hogwarts Express to being locked away with the other four and what had occurred that day. They are being sent to Azkaban, I'm sure of it. Yugi nodded. That's likely. I'm sorry. But now we've got to hurry. Then he turned to Jun for reasons Cole could not understand. We're taking it back home. Cole could have sworn his cat shook his head. Yugi said some unmistakable words in his native language. Then he turned to Cole again. Jun will get you out of here. Do as she tells you. She'll be able to protect you. Don't underestimate her. Others will. Use that to your advantage. Cole's eyes were wide like saucers. Isn't Jun a cat? Surely a clever one, but still a cat. Yugi and the one he had inquired about shook their heads simultaneously. Jun isn't actually a cat. What she is, I will keep to myself for your own sake. Now hurry! Jun set off, obviously expecting Cole to follow her. He did not. But what about the others? Go! Yugi said when he heard footsteps approach from the other side of door number 7. I'll take care of them, I promise. Just leave before they catch you. They won't let you live. But they're in Azkaban, or soon will be, Cole said, protesting for the last time. Yugi sighed and was silent for a while, his gaze turning inwards. When he looked up again, Cole was taken aback by the determination in the amethyst eyes. Then I'll go to Azkaban. Cole did not believe him, but he did really not have a choice. Cole did not believe him, but he did not really have a choice. The footsteps were a ticking clock, and the moment that door opened, he could kiss his life goodbye. Save them! Cole said before running off after Jun. He had just enough time to disappear around the corner before the door opened. With a last glance, he saw that both Jungsun and the King of Games had disappeared, and a pink-clad woman was furiously scurrying around the hallway. Taking cover underneath the abandoned desk somewhere on the 5th floor, he turned to Jun. Will he really go to Azkaban? Jun just looked at him. Then she nodded with a gaze telling him, yes, he definitely will.